Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine issues of interest to the public, both at home and abroad. And on this particular program, we'll be looking at the confrontation and the controversy between the PPP Civic Administration and the Guyana Public Service Union. When you understand that there are about 27,000 public servants in this country, you can see that it's a major sector. It's probably, the state is probably the largest employer of persons in the country. And the Public Service Union is the premier public trade union, representing the majority of them, although all of them don't belong to the GPSU, of course. But collectively, the education that public service bring to the management of the country, the experience and the expertise are priceless. And it is harmful to the public good for this experience and education expertise to be wasted. When you see the controversy that takes place, or that is taking place between the PPP's administration and the GPSU, you wonder, well, who does it serve? The country is suffering. And we must, as members of society, examine what is taking place and see what role we can play in ensuring that the country is better managed. Now, I go back to the United Nations because this is a very important organization which thinks about issues all around the world. And Guyana is involved, of course, as one of the countries. But the United Nations designated a day as Public Service Day. And let me quote verbatim what is meant to be achieved. The Public Service Day is meant to celebrate the value and the virtue of public service to the community. It is meant to highlight the contribution of public service in the development process. It is meant to recognize the work of public servants, and is meant to encourage young people to pursue careers in the public service. In other words, an educated, efficient, and energetic public service is essential to every modern state. It is not an option that you can do without it. You have to have an efficient public service if you want the state to be properly managed. Otherwise, there'll be arbitrariness and there'll be inefficiency. The GPSU was established 101 years ago. It is not a fly-by-night organization. It is not just another NGO. It is a strong and fundamental organization established in 1923. So it's over a century old, and its aim originally, it was called the British Guyana Civil Service Association in colonial times, to ensure fairness and justice for its members and to advance their interests through collective bargaining, representation, training, and education, and also with judicial reference to and industrial action. The union has had to defend itself over the last 6 decades or more against the PPP's attacks. And particularly in 1961 to 64, the union was involved in big strikes. And it is fair to say that historically, the PPP assumed that the public servants were adversarial and they have to bring it down when it lost the elections in 1964. It didn't feel that, the damage that was done by the strikes, by the troubles and the disturbances, but they blamed the unions for bringing it down. And they also blamed the CIA. Well, the CIA didn't bomb boats and throw bombs in buses at Tain and Lusignan. It was the PPP and the GAWU which was behind the violence. But the PPP has adopted an attitude, an unfriendly attitude, which has hindered national development by spending time, energy, and resources to fight down the public service union. It has hobbled public institutions, which the PPP intends to dominate. And it has also harmed the personal well-being of public servants. The GPSU has been trying very hard to engage the PPP administration in collective bargaining. It has demands, yes, it wants to sit down at the table and speak with the employer, which is the state, the government. But the PPP has refused to do so, and as a result, the Public Service Union has had to take recourse or resort to the courts very frequently. I'm not going to go into all of the details but of the present court actions, but the British Guiana Civil Service Association, as it was then, was instrumental in the strikes of 1962 and 63, and it forced the PPP government at the time to alter its budgets in order to accommodate the demands of the unions. Well, not only the Public Service, the Civil Service Association, but also other unions. But coming to the more modern period, if you can call it that, during the time of Mrs. Janet Jagan, the brief presidency of Mrs. Jagan, in 1999, there was a 57-day strike. And it had a crippling effect. It was a very powerful strike. And because of its duration, 57 days, and because of its impact on state agencies and ministries, it brought a lot of government activity to a halt. The Georgetown Hospital was affected. Customs and Excise Department, as it was called then, was affected. Inland Revenue Department was affected. Lands and Surveyors Department. And government was paralyzed. And in the end, several organizations had to come out in support of the public servants. The Private Sector Commission, the Council of Churches, the Trade Union Congress, the Guyana Bar Association. There are photographs. You can Google and see all of them. People are on the streets, lawyers and the other civil society members supported the public servants. Finally, they were able to persuade the government to go to arbitration, and the arbitral award, known as the Armstrong Tribunal, awarded public servants in part about 31% increase in salaries. So you can imagine how badly off they were prior to 2000. And even so, the PPP administration of the day was reluctant. Finally, it agreed to pay that amount, and some of the provisions of the Armstrong Award were never implemented. But since 2000, I can tell you, the PPP has apparently taken a decision not to go to arbitration, not to deal with the public service again, to just hand out, small amounts by the teaspoon, every year, 4% or 5% or something like that, which is inadequate. It's like a patient on drip. The patient doesn't recover. It just keeps the patient in a state of partial, inability. You can call it that. Now, the GPSU has recognized that this attitude on the part of the PPP administration keeps the public servant in a state of dependency. And it's a deliberate policy of the PPP administration to refuse to honor its responsibilities under the collective labor agreement, the CLA, to negotiate necessary relief. Many people realize and recognize that the public servants require a high level of salary. I know of situations in which public servants actually borrow money on a monthly basis from their own credit union to meet household expenses, which means at the end of the month they have to repay some of those loans and then borrow more money to pay bills. So they're always in debt. And this is the situation facing our public, a very unhappy situation facing our public servants. And the GPSU, when they attempt to approach the state-controlled boards like the Trade Union Recognition and Certification Board, they're told to go back to the collective labor agreement, and the situation is almost a case of circular causation, that they get nowhere by going to state agencies and even by approach to the courts. So the government studiously ignores the request of the Guyana Public Service Union for negotiations, and because of the problems that arose during the 57-day strike in 1999, a lot of support has drained away from the GPSU. And in fact, it's difficult for the GPSU to call that type of strike again. And I think the PPP recognizes that. In fact, the PPP created an organization of their own so that the senior public servants could now join a public service staff association. So what you find happening, my friends, is that at the Public Service Commission, there's a representative of the Public Service Staff Association, which has about 20 members, and the public servants, who probably come up to over 20,000 members, have no representation. It's a huge anomaly, and it doesn't solve the problem that most public servants find it difficult to get by on the salaries that they receive. And as a result, like other branches of the public service, the nurses and teachers, they continue to leave the country. And the PPP seems to be very satisfied with that. And they just decide to bring in people from Bangladesh or somewhere else, knowing very well that if they try to remedy the problems facing the nurses and public servants, many of them would stay and we'd have a more efficiently run government. But this is not happening. The PPP has taken the opportunity, sadly, to launch a campaign when they came back in office in August 2020, to launch a campaign against the Public Service Union. They have succeeded in dominating the Public Service Commission. And even, this is incredible, even the first public service staff college to be created in this country, the Borcham College of the public service, was simply disbanded. Obviously, the PPP is not interested in an educated and trained public service. So this is an attempt by the APNU AFC coalition to establish our first staff college, and it was simply dissolved. In addition to that, within days of getting into government, the PPP sent home 1,800 public servants. Some of these persons were not political activists. Some of them were young mothers. Some of them had children. 1,800 people they sent home. No investigation, no justification, no compensation. Just sent them home. This is the attitude of the PPP. Well, these weren't even unionized, but these were public servants who had contracts and were serving in good faith. 1,800 persons. I myself went on the street and picketed, but there was no relief by the PPP. So the PPP seems to have taken a decision to weaken the Public Service Union. And even during strikes, such as there were, though you hardly get public service strikes now, public servants were intimidated and threatened. And many of them decided to just migrate. So the intimidation that they suffered, the threats, and the difficulties they had at work just forced them to migrate. And this is what has happened, particularly to our teachers, who continue to leave the country in droves. So the PPP is actually eroding and undermining not only the union, but the very public service which is needed to run the country. And as I pointed out a minute ago, they created this special organization called the Public Service Senior Staff Association, the PSSA. So they kept the permanent secretaries out. And you can see uh, quite recently in the newspapers, they decided that it's okay for public servants to be members of political parties. So they just threw the whole concept of impartiality and objectivity out of the window to justify their own appointment of public servants who very often are not qualified either by education or experience to hold the positions that they have been given. Now, when you have in a country like Guyana, not only the traditional public servants, you have 10 administrative regions which need educated, trained, efficient regional officers, REOs as they're called, regional executive officers, to administer these huge regions. So when you see disasters that's happened in Madia with the incineration of these poor school children, there's a lot of dodging of blame and responsibility. But when you appoint people who are not trained to administer those huge regions or responsibilities, to bear those responsibilities, this is what is likely to happen. I'm not blaming a person or this person or that person, but what I'm saying is that if you need a regional executive officer for a region which is bigger than Costa Rica, you need a highly trained public servant. But when you dismantle the public service college, and when you just appoint people on the basis of party affiliation, um, you can see that government, the quality of government will suffer. So PPP disdains impartiality, and ideologically, it's not a matter of socialism or capitalism, or Leninism or anything. They just want straightforward loyalty to the PPP, and they have no use for any notion of neutrality. Obviously, when a citizen approaches the public service, they approve. It cannot expect objectivity. It cannot expect dispassionate judgments. It can expect to be speaking to a PPP activist. That is what the public service in Guyana has come to. So the PPP is now in a position to dictate senior positions, appointments to senior positions. And this became clear from 1992 when they appointed persons, for example, one of the chairmen of the Public Service Commission, which is to be the holy of holies in terms of the public service. These are the guardians of public service impartiality and integrity. One of the first people they appointed was a deputy premier, former deputy premier of the PPP, and a former chairman of the PPP. Another one was another PPP minister. So there was no trace of impartiality. There's no trace of objectivity. And they just twisted the entire public service out of shape. This has been going on since 1992. It's nothing new. So the PPP is determined to dictate service appointments. And this was evident, for the last 28 years or more. This raises the question, of course, whether the appointment of partisan people in the public service is doing the country any good. My friends, coming back to the question of the PPP's war against the GPSU, you can see that it has been going on for a long time, because back in the 1960s, 1961, 62, 63, what we call the disturbances, the PPP has, in word and deed, blamed the public servants for helping to uh, force it to leave office. But it left office because of the results of the elections of December 1964. And it left office because of the destruction it wrought on ordinary citizens and their communities during the disturbances. That's the long and short of the story. So it's not by blaming the public service. Many of the public servants were even born 60 years ago. And they can't be blamed for what took place then, even if they were blamed to be shared. The fact is that no country, no modern state could hope to develop without an efficient public service. And a major achievement of the APNU AFC coalition was the focus on having better educated public servants. And this was done through the Bertram College of the Public Service. Its focus was on efficiency, and this was evident in the appointment of the Howard Lutchman Commission of Inquiry. And that was the first commission of inquiry into the public service for a very long time. But it showed the seriousness of the APNU AFC coalition in terms of restoring the public service to standards of efficiency, which are prevalent in other parts of the Caribbean, Commonwealth Caribbean. And it paid attention to the emoluments. And they were, in the early days, without the $1 trillion budget, the APNU AFC coalition was able to substantially augment the wages and salaries of public servants. You know, in the lowest case, I mean, I must admit that we paid attention to some of the lowest levels of the service. People like, cleaners and sweepers. People were getting $30,000 a month. When you look back, you can see how incredible, those little sums of money were. And in some cases, the emoluments were trebled. In other cases, pensioners were getting, $10,000 now it's doubled and tripled now. So we paid attention to the human side of development because we feel that public servants were treated better, they'd work better, and the country would be more efficiently administered. So that has been a focus, and unfortunately, the discontinuation of the work of the Bertram College of the Public Service has led and will eventually lead to a deterioration in the quality of public service. We felt that it was difficult to accept that high school graduates could just come off the street one day and be a public servant the next day. And we felt that we should go into some type of academy or training institution to learn how government works, to learn about the Constitution, learn about the regional system, learn about financial accountability. So the recklessness that we are seeing now with the award of contracts and the deterioration in the quality of administration in some of the regions would not have occurred if the graduates of the Bertram College of the Public Service were allowed to occupy positions and perform in a manner that is acceptable. Right now, we do not have an acceptable world-class public service because PPP insists on appointing people as permanent secretaries who get stopped at the airports in the United States and who have their visas taken away. So that is what the PPP has reduced the public service to. These are the people who should be the highest level of the public service, but it is bringing the country into disrepute. And we need to understand what is taking place because we will all suffer as a result of this recklessness. The PPP needs to see the public servants as partners, and the state needs to deal with the union that represents the public service. They're not enemies, they're not opponents. They have to learn to work together because we're working for the good of Guyana. The public service is a permanent and inseparable part of the state. You need an efficient public service to implement cabinet's executive decisions. The public service is meant to be there from regime to regime, administration to administration. A permanent secretary means exactly what it says. Ministers come and go, but the permanent civil servants should ensure continuity in government. Public servants should be allowed to perform their duties impartially, and they must be protected from the misdirection by politicians for short-term political advantages by the party in office. The PPP still has the opportunity to implement the recommendations of the Armstrong Tribunal, which has not been completed, not been fulfilled during that 8-week public service strike in 1999. And the PPP felt hurt, and if you look at the comments of the government at the time, you can see that they were not happy at all giving the public servants these deserts. My friends, the public service is an essential component of the modern state. No modern state could be without an efficient public service. And a lot of damage is being done by trying to undermine the work of the Guyana Public Service Union and trying to undermine the morale of public servants. If it is motivated and if it's demotivated and demoralized, it cannot function efficiently. It is interest of the state to look back at what UNESCO has to say about the United Nations has to say about the public service. That is, a particular day every year was set aside to celebrate the value and virtue of the public service to the community, to highlight the contribution of the public service in the development process, and to recognize the work of public servants and encourage young people to pursue careers in public service. You cannot do without an efficient, educated, and energetic public service if you want to modernize Guyana. You can't move faster or further without coming to terms with the need to have an educated public service. It is in the public interest. It is in the public interest for the PPP to alter its mindset, to alter its attitude to collaborating with the Guyana Public Service Union, so that public servants will soon be able to enjoy a better quality of life and make Guyana a better place for us all to live in. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his bit.
Oh, Jesus Christ, if cost of living double, I don't know what happened. A pound of sugar is $300 already. Flour, everything gone up. Everything just raising. You gotta get about $40,000 for buy good ration. You gotta get 3 man now. A weekend man, a monthly man, and a fortnight man.